Good afternoon. Welcome to Global Public Affairs exclusive webinar series, Insight to Impact. Definitely a very busy time. Tariffs, even though we won a month-long reprieve from potentially devastating U.S. tariffs from the Trump administration, there is a deep sense of anxiety hanging over businesses right across this country. So someone to help us dig into that in just a moment, we have David Dodge, the former governor of the Bank of Canada, joining us today. So thank you, Mr. Dodge. I know people will be anxious to hear what you have to say. And first, I want to bring in our CEO, Randy Pettipaw, because we are in a new neck of the woods, and we want to give you a sense of why Randy and I are both out in Halifax and a sense of why we're here today.
Thanks, Hannah. And I am going to be brief, but I do want to since we have a lot of people on here today, and we have some new clients on here today that have, this may be the first time they've been part of one of these global webinars. So a special welcome to them. And why do we have new clients? Why are we in Halifax? We announced yesterday that we have expanded into Atlantic Canada. We have acquired and merged with M5 Public Affairs, which was the biggest player in Atlantic Canada. They presence in all provinces. We are very, very happy to have this merger happening, and it just improves the service that we can bring to clients across the board in all parts of the country. I also wanted to, and I know people aren't here to hear me advertise global public affairs, but thank you for indulging me and let me go down that road. But more importantly, and it is David Dodge people want to hear from today, we are, as a company, very, very active on all the Canada-U.S. relations, particularly tariffs, obviously, with what's happening right now. We are spending a good part of every day advising clients, talking to clients, researching, find out what people need to know, what's in their best interest, how to position. And I just wanted to reassure people that we are on this. And if you have not heard from us but would like to, please let us know. And we are here to do everything we can to help advise clients through these tumultuous times. So with that, Hannah, I'm going to let people get on to the person they really want to hear from, both you and David Dodge. And thanks, everybody, for giving me these few minutes.
Randy, thank you so much. Appreciate that. So yeah, let's get right into this, because we know for clients right across the country, there has been a roller coaster weekend of negotiations. And I want to bring in David Dodge. Thank you kindly for taking the time with us today. I just want to let people know, before I get to this first question for you, Mr. Dodge, there are also an opportunity for you to ask Mr. Dodge any question you may have. And if you want to do that, you enter your question in the comments section. It's just off to the side, and we'll go through those as well. So start putting those in right away, because this is your opportunity too to speak with such a fabulous expert. So Mr. Dodge, let's get right down to this. You have a very long and varied career, seen the gory inner workings of government, both domestically and internationally. Have you ever seen anything like this mess?
Nothing exactly like it, no. We've been through messy times before. We worked our way through them, and we'll work our way through this one as well.
So one of the things, I'm mentioning, it was a roller coaster weekend for sure. Everybody was on the seat of their pants, basically, seeing what would happen. We got the stay of execution, essentially. For companies who are out there going, what should we expect in the next 30 days? Let's start with that. What should we expect?
Well, I don't think anyone other than Mr. Trump can tell you, give you an answer to that. But first of all, I think it's important to understand what the motivations here are, and they're not necessarily the ones that are broadcast. First of all, Mr. Trump needs some revenue because he wants to extend the current income tax cuts and cut more. And so he is looking to tariffs as a way to do that. That's definitely an issue. Secondly, security of supply issues for the Republican Party and for many Americans it is important, and there's a sense that if you can force more production into the United States so that they don't have to rely on other suppliers, that would be a benefit. And finally, there is a degree of concern that they have about the deficit, although that is, I would argue, misplaced. So I don't expect uh, that we are going to return, certainly not during Mr. Trump's mandate. I don't expect that we're going to return to a period where we can rely on tariff-free entry to the United States, and that everybody, in a sense, is going to have to be prepared for the fact that we will lose that tariff-free entry in some way or another, and it'll affect different businesses differently. And collectively, we as Canadians are going to have to prepare for that, and individual businesses are going to have to be prepared for that. Finally, let me just make the last point that the uncertainty that Mr. Trump has created, the difficulty of dealing with a madman across the table on any issue creates uncertainty, and that's basically where we are. And that uncertainty has a cost in and of itself that continues. And so the risk of reinvesting in Canada for any firm which relies on the US market and for whom overseas markets are less accessible, then firms are going to have to continue to consider, unfortunately, the possibility that that tariff-free entry disappears and that they won't have the access to the U.S. market that they have had. So
Let me
that's where we stand.
That's where we stand. So I'm going to ask for your prediction, and I'll probably ask at the end of this too. So 30 days, 31 days, puts us at about March 4th from when they announced the reprieve. Do you expect we'll see the 10% on energy and 25% on all other Canadian goods?
I expect that we're going to see some tariff continue, whether it's the full 25% on non-energy uh, and 10 on energy. I really don't know, but I think that there are reasons in particular because he does need revenue, and however much, however bad the macroeconomic impacts of reaching to tariffs are for the United States, I will be surprised if we don't have some continuing action.
So he needs that revenue. So continuing action, be prepared for that is what you say. How would you advise businesses? And I know it's quite a scope. How would you advise them to prepare? Because
Well,
we have,
it
yeah,
really depends on the business, Hannah.
right.
That's the issue. So, I mean, if you're in a business like autos and auto parts, which is highly integrated across North America, um, then I think, in some sense, there's a chance, a smaller chance, that those tariffs will be extended in that way because the costs are immediate and high for the U.S. consumer and high for U.S. workers in that industry. There are a lot of other industries where the degree of integration is not as high, and hence uh, um, the immediate cost to the United States, either business or governments or people, is lower.
I want to get to questions because I know already started flowing, and we have one in already from John Weeb. We can see the question on the screen, but I'll read it to you, Mr. Dodge. David, is Canada's market big enough minus energy to be self-sustaining? And a reminder, throw your questions in as well. So what do you think of that question, David?
Yes, it is. I mean, we sustained on a national market for a long period of time. Sustained on a national market. I mean, sustained in not having free entry to the United States for a long period of time. The problem is, it means that we cannot have the length of production runs that we can have when we work to fill a market for the whole of North America. And it means that we face a number of barriers when we have to go overseas to replace the U.S. market for our product. But it depends on the product, quite frankly. For some products, the domestic market constitutes a fairly large share of demand. For other products, a relatively small share.
But my question to that, and we do have more questions coming up, my question to that is we sign these free trade agreements in order to be able to have those open markets. How do you build up your own market so that you can be either self-sustaining or sending it to other countries?
By getting more efficient. That's the basic way you do it. It doesn't matter who you are, what you produce, whether it's a good or a service, that's what you've got to do. And that means you've got to continue to invest in your own business to drive down your production cost and drive up the quality or the particular nature of your product, which makes that indispensable to purchasers, whether they are domestic or foreign. So that is the first thing that we have to do. We have to do it regardless of what happens on the tariff front. And in many ways, one might say Mr. Trump has done us a big favor by forcing us as Canadians to think much harder and invest much more in increasing our own productivity.
So here's a follow-up to that as well before I get to some of the other questions. Given the fact that Donald Trump is also threatening Europe, should we be working with them on a multinational approach?
The answer is yes. That is, of course, what we've done. That has been our policy since GATT in 1947. And we have benefited from a world which has become increasingly open. And so absolutely, if we have to work hard with other open liberal democracies to reestablish some form, perhaps on a regional basis, of the trade arrangements which we had on a global basis through the WTO.
I want to bring in another question from one of the people who are here. This is from Terry. I would assume that the tariff would have to be applied in a market-specific or HS code specific way. Do you think this will be the case?
Well, we will see. And that's what I said. When you asked me the question, do I think it'll happen after March the 4th or whatever the drop dead date is? I think there's going to be something happening, but it's going to be quite different, I think, or could well be quite different, because this was a hastily designed, rather blanket approach without any real consideration yet by the Americans of exactly how they would want to impose it themselves. And depending on what industry you have, the impact is quite different depending exactly how it is done.
Let me jump in on that because Terry follows up by saying, in particular, as it relates to U.S. DoD buying from Canadian firms. Is there any more insight you can give on that?
I don't know the answer to that.
Okay, No problem. We'll try to get you that answer, Terry, and get back to you on it. Nikki Hilton has this question. How does the unpredictability of the U.S. administration impact global stock markets? Is there an unintended consequence from some of the rhetoric, i.e., spooking investors on a broader scale, not just for Canadian businesses, but for all businesses?
I think the answer is yes, because it just creates more uncertainty. And uncertainty essentially will play itself out in the form of more volatility in those markets. And I think that uncertainty about what the U.S. is going to do um, actually makes investment in any other jurisdiction more risky than it was before because of the importance of the U.S. market to everybody and and the impact of what the Americans do uh, on the relative profitability of investment elsewhere and in the United States. So, yes, I think the impact is there. We're going to see it. And the only one I can uh, foresee with a great degree of certainty is that there's going to be more volatility.
So if you think of what the government is doing right now, in the next 30 days, as a governor, former governor of the Bank of Canada, how would you sit there and figure out, okay, really, I hope they do this?
Well, there are two issues here,
Mm,
three issues. The first issue, as I said, this has provided a shock to us in Canada and should be forcing us to get on with doing a bunch of things we should have been doing for a long time to increase investment and the opportunity for investment in the private sector and in the public sector. So that is there. Government should be doing that regardless, whether it's making greater certainty on the regulatory front, whether it's making the sorts of investments in transport and so on that we need to ensure we can get to markets, all of those sorts of things we should be doing regardless, and we've not been doing it for quite a while. So the first thing the government should be doing is to be doing those things that it should have been doing, and this applies both at the federal and provincial level. The second issue, though, is trickier, and that is there's a negotiating issue as well as an actual issue. So the negotiation, basically, one can become try and make yourself into the quickest porcupine you can be to make life difficult for the Americans, not because you think it's good policy, but simply because you hope that that may change the tactics of the U.S. government, recognizing that there are huge costs of that policy in the short run here, but you're doing it as simply a short run policy, and I think that is clearly going to be an element of what we do.
Here's a good follow-up from Anik Eden. If you can go down to that question instead. Anik Eden, how will government fiscal policies need to adjust to support affected industries and workers? This is something I'm sure you have a great answer for.
Yeah. So I'm going to start by saying that the most important thing is that we adjust to the ongoing possibility that we've got less free entry to the United States. And so nothing that governments do in the short run should impede that adjustment. Whatever we do should facilitate that adjustment, and certainly we should not impede that adjustment. And so that means getting on with resolving the income tax issues that were left open by the federal government. I mean, um, obviously, having a tax system that is not favorable to investment is not a good thing.
So
So,
get rid of that capital
so
gains
well,
increase is what you're
that
saying.
and deal with the rather high marginal rate we have, and so on. I mean, there are a bunch of things that we should be doing. But the main thing is that we are going to have to adjust, and and you can't just spray a lot of money around to compensate people for what has been lost. What money governments spend or what taxes they reduce all ought to be aimed at making industry here more productive and more resilient, not in compensating for losses that have been incurred. What we need to do is to facilitate change, both for the labor force and for business.
So what I'm hearing is not a COVID-like program.
Absolutely not.
That was a good short answer. I want to go to, we've got a lot of questions
It's
here.
not a COVID problem. It's the same sort of problem that we've had in the past, when in the 70s, when oil prices jacked up and we had to make an adjustment, and we had problems because we were unwilling to make the adjustment. We tried to cushion the blow rather than to adjust. Or the problem we had in the great financial crisis in 2008, where we simply had to adjust to the fact that U.S. demand had fallen off dramatically, and we had to make an adjustment. So that's what we have to do, and this is not the COVID problem at all.
I want to ask a question that Wasim Abood has here in the question side. Isn't now the right time to start creating more added value for our Canadian products by starting first with our natural resources and critical minerals that are in demand from the whole world? Thank you, Wasim.
I think that's true. You lead from strength, whether that strength happens to be in oil and gas, or that strength happens to be in critical minerals, or that strength happens to be in certain very strong human resources that we have in a number of areas of high tech. So you start from strength, absolutely.
Here's another question from Anik Idan. How will government fiscal policies need to adjust to support affected industries? Because we were just talking about what type of compensation should be out there. How would they adjust them?
Well, it's not just affected industries. In a sense, everybody is affected, because even if one doesn't sell directly to the United States, your own customers here in this country and your customers, Hannah, in your business, are in the end affected as well, right? And so, how do you adjust? You adjust, and what can government do is to make those investments in government that will increase our own productivity, but increase the foreseeable profitability for private sector to make investments themselves. And that means dealing with what are a number of irritants on the regulatory side. It means getting rid of interprovincial barriers that have built up over time and reduce our productivity and our ability to sell to one another. It means continuing to invest on the human resource side, in the skills that are going to be required as we move forward. And as I said, it does mean what government should be spending on, whether it's transport facilities or whatever, that increase the profitability of private investment in industries that use those government facilities.
Let me pick up on that. This is a good question from Tanis Fiss. In the short term, how can Canadian businesses limit the flight of talent and investment to the United States?
Well, the simple answer is you're going to have to pay them and offer them the opportunities that Americans offer. I mean, people are going to move, right? That's a great strength of our Western society is that people do move, and so the simple answer is one that I think everybody understands. Doesn't necessarily like it, but I think everybody understands that.
Yeah, let me also pick up on that answer previously too, because Tom Oliver has a question about this too. Interprovincial barriers. Since the beginning of my career, we have been talking about bringing down the walls provincially. Tom says, should Canada have free trade between all provinces?
Absolutely.
Lick it, stick it, stamp it, just like that. Why is it such a problem then? Why can't we get that? Like I said, 25 years I've been in the industry and we've been talking about it with premiers ever since then.
Yes, because governments, any government, reacts more to people that are screaming about potential losses due to competition from outside. And that's kind of natural, right? That is a natural thing. If you can avoid, if you can knock your competitor out, or can have government action knock your competitor out, uh, then as an individual firm, uh, you have an advantage. But collectively, we pay a big price because it means the production runs, if you will, that one has just to fulfill the needs of the province of Ontario or the province of British Columbia uh, are too short to be as efficient as possible, and too short to provide exciting opportunities for investment and for your own staff.
Productivity, I would say, is kind of a sleeper issue that we should be paying attention to. And if you reduce these interprovincial trade barriers, will you see productivity come up?
You have more competition. What drives productivity in the end is the fear of going broke, or putting on the other side the potential to make a lot of money, right? And if you open markets so that you can sell your product just as you sell your consulting services across the country, and you've just said why you're opening in Halifax, um, that makes your product better. It makes it more exciting for the people that work for you, and it means the investment that you have to make in capital equipment and so on and so forth can be spread across a bigger market. So I mean that's the long and the short of the answer, and because of geography, moving goods across the country is often more expensive than moving goods north and south into U.S. markets. And so it's not surprising that when we brought down barriers to the U.S. market, we simply paid less attention to Canadian markets. This is for goods where there are significant transport costs and other costs of operating east-west across long distances. Um, it's not surprising that we kind of paid less attention to the markets, that central Canada paid less attention to the importance of the prairie markets or to the maritime markets than they did before. So, in a sense, it was the potential for free trade with the United States that made it less imperative for businesses and for governments to deal with the barriers which we have created internally.
And then a follow-up question to that. Thank you, Tricia, for this one. Tricia Hutzel says, will decreasing interprovincial barriers increase productivity more than reinstating full U.S. trade access?
Well, I think that's a very hard question to answer, just as it's put. But the answer is, what's really important is both.
Mm. Can I ask you a question? And this is something we've been talking with clients over the weekend, ever since this all began. One of the biggest concerns for them is the fluctuation of the Canadian dollar, because we got it imposed on Saturday and we just saw the dollar tank. It's been the lowest in 20 years, I think, Mr. Dodge. Is that correct?
Yes, although not the lowest in modern history by any means.
Yeah. What type of advice would you give to businesses concerned about that?
Well, in terms of selling into the U.S. market, uh,
Hmm.
the depreciation of the Canadian dollar against the U.S. dollar, combined with the appreciation of the U.S. dollar against everybody, including Canada, um, means that for businesses whose costs are largely incurred in Canada in Canadian dollars, there is an offset that comes from that depreciation. So as we've moved from 75 cents, say, which was kind of equilibrium a year ago, to let's call it 69 cents today, that is a depreciation of a little over 10%. And so the Alberta oil producer, while they may face a 10% tariff on their sales, in Canadian dollars, they'll be able to realize what they were realizing a year ago, because the depreciation has pretty much offset, not quite, but partly offset, largely offset. That'll be a lot less. That can be less for other industries because of the nature of their product. But so we can expect that if indeed we are going to have a more permanent high level of U.S. tariffs, whether it's the current 25% or whatever, that the Canadian dollar will, because of market forces, depreciate, and at the same time, the Bank of Canada, because demand overall for Canadian products will be weaker, there will be excess supply in Canada, and the Bank of Canada will move to the bottom end of its so-called neutral range, which would take rates down from where are we, about 3% right at the moment, down Bank of Canada rate down to something like 2 or that order of magnitude. So we can expect that the bank will adjust, but the markets themselves are making an adjustment to help offset the impact of that tariff for Canadian producers that sell in American dollars but pay for their production in Canadian dollars.
I have a great question here from Mark Schultz. Hi, Mark. Thank you for joining the webinar today. How crucial is it for the government to review and or address personal income tax rates in relation to productivity, talent attraction and retention, and capital investment? Thanks, Mark.
Well, it certainly that is tax rates are an important lever that governments have to encourage investment. In particular, investment tax credits in the corporate income tax can play a very important role. The top marginal rate, both the corporate side and the personal side, is also a concern. I think it's the rather low level at which the top personal rate kicks in that is a big problem, and the height of it, because you certainly don't want to discourage people, highly motivated tech people, for example, from staying in Canada because the rates are so high. But yes, tax rates do matter, and tax structure matters. And in that sense, very unfortunate timing of changing the capital gains inclusion rate. But yes, those matter. But that means government has less revenue. And to the extent that we want to continue to receive health services and so on from governments, they're going to have to fill in that revenue somewhere. And that means filling it in with taxes on the goods and services that you and I consume every day, right? There's no free lunch here at all. But I think it is absolutely true, and we've got a lot of evidence to this, that we would be a lot better off if we rebalanced our tax system nationally and provincially to reduce those high rates that impede investment and impede high productivity people from staying in Canada. And fill it in with rates on ordinary consumer goods. That's a very tough thing. As we know, Mr. Mulroney got defeated, at least in part because of that. But it was that very change in the tax structure, away from punitive high income tax rates to more broad-based sales tax rate or consumption tax rates, that provided the strength of our economy to deal with the market downturn which we faced in 1990, and to be able to do extraordinarily well through the 1990s, even though we were cutting expenditures, government expenditures at the federal and provincial level. So it's not very nice. It's not very appealing. The initial impact will fall across everybody, meaning lots of that impact is going to be on you and I as ordinary Canadian consumers. But in the end, if we fail to produce goods and services, we will not be able to survive. In the end, we can only eat what we produce in the end. And if we want to live better, eat better, then we've got to produce more efficiently and at lower costs.
Alice has a great question, and this is a topic of discussion that has been going on for quite some time. Alice McCarron, thank you for this. In the event of a 25% tariff on Canadian goods and then counter tariffs, in your opinion, would be cutting the carbon tax help offset the economic impact to consumers and to businesses? Thank you, Alice.
No, because you would also cut the money the revenue that's being distributed right back. So in that sense, it doesn't help. And I think what would happen in the end is that we will have to find other mechanisms to try provide continuing incentive for industry to be as to reduce as far as possible the amount of greenhouse gases they produce. But remember, this is a balanced thing. When you say cut the carbon tax, you cut the $250 a quarter that you're distributing to every Canadian. right? So it's not got a fiscal impact.
I want to go on to a question from Rudy Demis. Beyond adjustments to the bank rate, would the Bank of Canada have other tools at their disposal to support government efforts to alleviate the economic impacts of the U.S. tariffs?
Well, there are two different issues here.
Okay.
In the very short term, of course, if there's a financial market convulsion, and the job of the bank is to provide stability in financial markets, that's their job, and they would do that. And they do that in the short run by increasing the reserves that banks have. I mean, that's standard. Standard. The other issue then that you looked at is, well, should the bank continue or try to do what we did after COVID, and that is to purchase long bonds so that you bring down the long rate relative to the short rate. I think my answer on that, and various people have different answers. My answer on that is the evidence is that it didn't contribute very much to helping the adjustment process at the time, and so that idea probably doesn't make sense at this point in time. So the main thing the bank will do is do what they're supposed to do. To the extent we have excess demand, excess supply, and unemployment rates rise, and there's downward pressure then on domestically generated prices, then they move rates down. That's exactly what they said they do. That's what their agreement with the government of Canada is at the moment as to how they're going to operate, and that's what they will do.
Let me just, this just kind of popped in my head, but when you're the governor of the Bank of Canada, what type of advice is happening behind the scenes right now with the different cabinet committees, with the prime minister, and those types of things?
Well, let me start with something that is interesting and different in Canada. The Bank of Canada Act requires that the governor and the minister meet regularly and consult regularly, so that the programs of government, the fiscal policy of government, and the monetary policy of the bank, in a sense, work together. In the sense that both the government and the bank are working on the same information and are consulting with one another. That's not true in the United States. That is just not true. Where indeed the strength of the U.S. system is that the president is not supposed to interfere with what the bank does. Now, interfere is a strong word, and that's also true in Canada. The government cannot order the Bank of Canada around, but it's very important that policy, monetary and fiscal policy, which are both aiming to do the same thing, i.e., high unemployment, high economic growth. That's what we want. They're both aiming to do the same thing. That they talk to each other and try to maintain stabilization of the Canadian economy in that way.
I want to ask you this question because this has been a big part of the discussion over once we heard about these tariffs. How should Canada play its energy card in negotiations with the United States? And that's from Marianne Robson. Marianne, thank you. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's not just energy. I mean, there are some things where the U.S. demand for our products is highly inelastic, and that to the extent that we we reduce our supply to the United States, the unit price of what we supply goes up because the Americans will continue to want as much of that good as they did before, and the oil demand in the short run, at any rate, in the short run, is relatively inelastic, and so by restricting supply, that forces up the price that we get for our product in the United States. So so this is the classic issue: should you tax our exports at this point in time? And it totally depends on the elasticity of that demand in the United States. And to the extent that the U.S. can't get that product from somewhere else, then restricting our export of that product, whether it's oil or gas or whatever, that can help offset the tariffs, absolutely. So but that's very much a tactical issue. That's not a long-term issue. On a long-term issue, whether we put tariffs, whether we respond with tariffs on U.S. goods, or whether we respond through reduction of critical exports, in the long run, both of those tactics mean lower income for Canadians, right? So that's not what we want. Those are simply tactical measures to try to avoid having a permanent set of tariffs. And so you have to, you can only answer that question of a tactical issue versus where you want to get to in the long run. If we've got high tariffs, barriers to entry into the United States, in the long run, we can't deal with that by simply having high tariffs on American imports or restricting our supply of exports.
So that's really interesting. You made me think of that in a different way, that it's a tactical response. It's the long term that really we should be thinking about and how we respond to this.
Absolutely. And the first response in the long term is to do the things that we should have been doing for quite a while in terms of raising the investment, both private and public, that we are making in this country, and removing the barriers, whether they are interprovincial trade barriers or whether they are regulatory barriers that make it more costly to produce goods and services in Canada. That's the first reaction we should have. And quite frankly, we should thank Mr. Trump for provoking us to sit back down at the table and think very hard about what it is we've got to do to raise our productivity and hence raise the incomes of Canadians today, tomorrow, but more importantly, to continue to raise the incomes of our children and our grandchildren as we go ahead.
And you mentioned thanking Mr. Trump for something. Do you feel that this, and I kind of saw it over the weekend, has reignited Canadians in general to start paying attention to what and who we should be and be proud of? Because you saw that Canadians weren't happy and they were starting to look to maybe travel to different locations. That might be a short term, it might be a small thing, maybe reinvesting or spending money with Canadian goods. Has this, in your mind, reignited that maybe this is that point where we can invest and make sure that we are taking care of who we are?
I think absolutely. This is both political and an economic statement. I think the answer is yes on both fronts. And you know, we've coasted along. We've not thought hard about some of these issues for a while. And yes, I think being forced now to think about it, just like, you know, every time you face an exam at university, you're forced to actually sit down and learn the things that you should have been learning all term, but you're actually forced to do it because there's a circumstance then that is creating a test for you. So yes, I think so, and that's why I say, in many ways, I think we should thank Mr. Trump for forcing us to think hard about these issues of national identity, these issues of what we need to do to preserve our or to enhance our productivity so we can preserve our increasing standard of living for us and our kids.
Gary has a great question. I want to try to get to some more of these. We're about 10 minutes away from the end of this, but lots of questions. And you kind of did answer this, Mr. Dodge. As Canadian companies, you might think of some other things. Must seek alternative markets. What action steps can the federal government implement immediately to initiate and support private sector efforts in that?
I think what the government does and has been doing, and I think it's important to emphasize has been doing, is to try to ensure that we have access to other markets, whether they're the Asian markets where those markets are very large and where we have a very low penetration, or the European markets through our negotiations with CETA, or let's not forget Britain, where we used to export a lot of our products to, in terms of negotiation with Britain on trade arrangements. So governments have been trying on that level to try to get things done. But secondly, I would put in a good word for our trade commissioners who are there in offices around the world. Their job is trade. Their job is to support Canadian businesses that are exporting, that want to export into those countries, both with information and analysis, but also by opening doors, to potential business partners in those destinations. So yes, that institution of the Canadian Trade Commissioner, I think, is an underutilized institution by business, and our people are underutilized. Businesses underutilize the services that are there, which the taxpayers already paid for.
Well, and that's kind of what Richard Dunn was asking too. He says we've put in place, and I'm going to summarize it a bit, a lot of these high profile trade agreements, but it doesn't feel like we've taken advantage of them. Would you agree with that?
I think that is true. That is true. It takes more work. I mean, let's be honest. It takes more work in markets where the language of business is not always English or French to start with. It just takes more work, and where you do not understand the local market, understanding the local market is an advantage that local companies have to start with. And it requires a lot of investment. You've got to go put an office down to begin to understand those markets, and that's expensive. Quite frankly, it's expensive to open an office, even in a nearby market like Mexico City, to try understand exactly how things are working in Mexico, which is easy to get to. It's right here in hand. you go to the Philippines or you go to Indonesia, it's a much more difficult effort. So it's understandable that businesses if to tap the market near at home first, because it is simply more. They have more knowledge about it, and you have to acquire the knowledge about the foreign market to really understand how you're going to actually make money by selling into that market.
Yeah, very good insights. I have one more question I want to get to here, and then we're going to wrap up. This has been a fulsome discussion, so appreciate it. Tom Oliver says, and I'm just going to shorten this one. Do you think a flat income tax system is possible to implement as a replacement for the complex tax system we have, income tax system?
I spent
Answer that.
I spent quite a bit of my life on worrying about tax issues, and simplicity was always one that everybody wanted, but in the end, it kind of dropped to the bottom of the list of what was important, and so we end with a tax system which is outrageously complex, because in effect we never want to do something that might hit some individual in a or some business in an untoward way. So I think we dream to think that we will not have some complexity in the tax system. Moreover, business practices keep changing, so the tax system has to change with that. But but the bigger issue of keeping the effective marginal rates, because it's how much of that extra dollars that you want to make is going to disappear in taxes that really counts. And we have starting with the Mulroney government. We brought down those marginal rates a lot. We are more or less competitive with 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 the United States in a number of areas, but not all. But we certainly could change the structure of our system, essentially to give more credit, uh, reduce taxes more if you're making investments through some form of investment tax credit, um, because it's really the investment issue that is the essential issue, and it's to get the return, the expected return on new investments after tax, to get that tax wedge on that expected return down to a level where Canada becomes attractive, or let me put it differently, not unattractive from a tax point of view to make the investment. It's not. We, I'm not suggesting we become Ireland, and basically uh, run a beggar thy neighbor policy on the rest of the world through the corporate income tax system. That, I'm not suggesting that, but we don't want to be unattractive relative to the rest of the world. And I think at the moment, we have to be on the edge of being at least marginally more attractive than we currently are. That is important, and it's especially important in areas like technology, where and growing tech companies and growing companies in general that in the end pay for a lot of their investments by paying their workers relatively little, but giving them access to what they hope will be shares, which will return a lot in the future. And so it is in, if you will, the high tech industry that I think the real cost of the high marginal personal income tax rate, it can be seen. It would be very important to get that down.
Mhm.
But also, uh, those are the folks that really hope that they're going to get a capital gain somewhere in the future to pay for the current salary that they're giving up by reinvesting in a new product.
Absolutely. We have about 1 minute left. This has absolutely zipped by. I want to just get your final thought, Mr. Dodge, on what you think will happen in the next little bit. And I know it's like, oh yeah, next little bit. We're talking about something that has just been wild and crazy ride, but just quickly, your final thought on all of this.
Well, I think for the next 30 days, we live with a lot of uncertainty. But my view, which I gave you earlier, I think that there will be continuing barriers, maybe not exactly as it is proposed, but there will be continuing barriers for a period of time until in the end, we can sit down and have a full scale renegotiation of what is now called CUSMA, our North American Free Trade Arrangement.
David Dodge, I am going to have to end it there, but it looks like everybody thoroughly enjoyed your discussion. I'm already getting great comments on the comment side about it. Thank you for your time today, and thank you for your insight.
You're very welcome, Hannah. It's been a pleasure.
Been a pleasure.
Good
I want to
luck,
thank
everybody.
Yeah, absolutely.
It.
We need it. I want to thank everybody for joining us on this exclusive webinar series, Insight to Impact from Global Public Affairs. I'm going to sign off now. And if you have any further questions, we have all kinds of team members here that can help you out. Just reach out at any point. Thank you kindly.
Okay.